Hey everyone, John with Vermont Homesteader. So today I'm making a video about selective service, the draft. And I don't know if any of you know, but the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress on June 14th of this year passed H.R. 8070. It's the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA as it's called in short. And it's just the House that passed it. It still has to go to the Senate. They have to put out their version of the bill, and then they'll do a conference committee, and then of course the president would have to sign it. But in that bill, the House passed, they automated selective service. So right now, every 18-year-old male by law is supposed to register for selective service, or they can be charged with a felony. And in the United States, we have about an 84% registration rate. So there's about 16% that don't register. And because of the field of employment they're in or whatever, they're not asked to register by their employer. That's usually how most 18-year-olds end up getting registered, is some employer asks them if they've registered for selective service, or they look them up. There's, I believe, a website where you can see who's registered for selective service. And if they're not on there, or they say, no, I haven't, they tell them to go register or they can't have a job. So that's how the system works now for the most part. So you have to ask why, with an 84% registration rate, why the government feels the need to automatically register everyone. They're going to use the internet, social media, whatever documents they can come across, birth certificates, social security, to basically track down every 18-year-old and have them automatically registered for selective service. And I sit back, and a whole bunch of questions come into my mind. But first off is why? Why do they need to know where every 18-year-old to 26-year-old male is in the United States? My personal opinion is the United States government is marching us into a war in Europe and or the Middle East or Southeast Asia or all of them. And they know they're going to need the bodies. So I've already written to my House member and my two senators and urged them to vote against the bill and to not automate selective service. And I'll explain why for several reasons. The first is a constitutional reason. And the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and I'll read it. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. There's no greater involuntary servitude than the draft. And though selective service is not actually the draft, it is how they find all the males to draft if the Congress and the president decide we need to draft people. But there's no greater involuntary servitude than the draft. It's the government taking people who don't want to go to war, who don't volunteer, who don't sign up, and forcing them to be trained to kill other people and go to war. If that's not involuntary servitude, then I don't know what is. The Fourth Amendment also says that people are supposed to be secure, the right of the people to be secure, and I'm going to cut out the other things, in their persons, against unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the person to be seized. And that article is usually used for criminal justice purposes and seeking warrants. But it clearly could also apply to the seizure of people, because when you're drafted, your person is actually seized and you are forced to go someplace that you don't want to go. Because if you wanted to go, you'd just sign up for the military. You'd volunteer. So the founders of this country did not want to force, they did not want to conscript people into military service. Clearly, they didn't want to. And in fact, in the Revolutionary War, they did not. It was all by volunteers. So instead of sticking to the Constitution, and if the American people think it is a just war that we should fight, and then they sign up and go fight in it, we shouldn't be forcing people to go to war. We shouldn't force people to go against the dictates of their own conscience and go kill other people who they may have no qualm with, except they're in a foreign country that the United States decided to go to war with. And I think if you look back in history, World War I, World War II, people just signed up. Even after 9/11, people just signed up because they saw it as necessary and just to defend the country. So they went and signed up. So that's my biggest beef with selective service and the draft, is that constitutionally it's just not constitutional. Now there's going to be somebody who I know is going to pipe up and say, well, how about Arver versus U.S. in 1918? In 1918, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that selective service was allowed under the Constitution. I don't know where they came up with that ruling. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. Again, no greater involuntary servitude than to be drafted into war. So, and that doesn't surprise me. That was the beginning of World War I. The Supreme Court made a political decision, knew that the military would need bodies, so they authorized a draft. But that's a political decision. The U.S. Supreme Court is not supposed to make political decisions. The U.S. Supreme Court is supposed to look at the Constitution and decide what the Constitution says, interpret the Constitution. And I'm sorry, but out of the 13th Amendment, you cannot get anything other than involuntary servitude upon being convicted of a crime and a punishment for that crime. Most people drafted are not criminals. They are everyday people who live here and just trying to live their life. They haven't committed a crime. They haven't been convicted of a crime and then forced into involuntary servitude. So it's just not constitutional. And as you know, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court makes political decisions, and then 50 to 70 years later, they overturn themselves. And I personally feel that that decision, Arver versus U.S. from 1918, needs to be reapproached and brought before the Supreme Court. Somebody needs to if there is a draft again and they get drafted, they need to file a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court and ask them to revisit Arver, because it's just wrong. It's not constitutional. It's a political decision. So that's my big take on selective service and the draft. Look, if another nation put troops on the beach in New Jersey and they invaded the United States, I'm 56 years old and I'd pick up my rifle and I'd go serve, because our homeland was being invaded by somebody else. We have no business in Ukraine. We have no business in the Middle East. we have no business in Southeast Asia. The founders of this country were very fearful of an organized military. They didn't want one. The way the system was supposed to work is the states were supposed to have militias, and if the United States was attacked, then they were supposed to call up the militias. The governors would authorize the giving of the militias over to the federal government, and you had an army, because all the states would provide their militias, and then all of a sudden there was an army. What we have today is not in the Constitution. That is not the view of the founders when the country was founded. And the militia, of course, was made up of us, regular everyday people who chose to join the militia, to drill, to train, in case the United States or the state itself was attacked. And that's the way it should be today. Selective service and a draft are unconstitutional. And if you can convince me otherwise, I'd be happy to listen to it. I'm as patriotic as they come. I served in law enforcement for 33 years. And if this country, if a foreign nation landed their troops here and made war against us, I'd be out there. And I would think most Americans would be out there. I don't think they'd sit in their homes and do nothing and say, oh, well, so this other nation has decided to invade us. What does it matter who rules over us? I don't think so. Not in America. I still have hope in America. Liberty, freedom, inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Smart men, the founders were. They realized you needed to have life first. And once you had life, you could have liberty. And with life and liberty, freedom, you could then pursue happiness. Selective service, the draft, involuntary servitude, not a pursuit of happiness. I think the founders would be shocked to know that we have a draft, or potentially have a draft, have a system set up, the precursor of a draft. If you have any comments, let me know. If you like this channel, like, subscribe, and share. It's Vermont Homesteader.